How long is it taking McMullen to get in? We got to ask him.
She'll tell us right now here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN as the DNC is in town for another day, and that means Eagles practice. Very tough to get to, John. How are you, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
Good to have you back here in the football mode as they start practice tomorrow. But you've been at NovaCare the last couple of days. You're probably leaving a little earlier to get from Jersey over to the NovaCare Center.
Yeah, it's added about. It normally takes me about 20 minutes, so it's tacked on about 20 to 25. Just because, as you guys mentioned, they shut down 95, a large swath of it. So as you're crossing the Walt Whitman, it gets really backed up on the toll road because people don't know they can't get on 95, and it just gets all the way backed up.
I heard 42 freeways even backed up. The cops are limited down to 2 lanes on the 42 freeway.
Yeah, and luckily, because Doug Peterson has shifted things, and this is good, he's having practice early in the morning, so I kind of beat that total gridlock at least a little bit, but it's not fun, and I will be thrilled. This is not a political statement, but I will be thrilled when the Democrats leave town.
Right. No, I was saying that regardless of who you're voting for, if you're not voting for the blue side, you're probably not happy sitting in traffic. And if you are voting for the blue side, you are probably not happy sitting in traffic.
You're absolutely not. And while I say that, the Philadelphia Police Department, I told Josh, they've been really good to us getting us through the security checkpoints. So they've done a good job. You understand they have to do it. I mean, we live in a world that we live in now, so there's always the threat of something happening. So you just got to grin and bear it. I just wish the Eagles would have said, hey, maybe we should start camp on Friday.
Might have been an interesting idea.
Or move it to Lehigh. Back to Lehigh.
No, I don't want to make that drive either. That far. Don't tell them that.
John, let's get into some of the things that you've seen and heard during the week here. Today, Doug Peterson. Yesterday, Jim Schwartz. I thought Schwartz gave us some more nuggets maybe than Peterson did, but I want to get your overall observations first off on Carson Wentz. He is the first-round pick. He got a lot of reps today because Peterson allowed, Bradford and Chase Daniels as veterans not to participate today. So seeing a lot from Wentz these first couple of days, including today, has he made an impression? Is he a guy that you look at and say, you know what, they're going to have to think about what their plans are with this kid because he's just going to stand out so much?
Well, I think it's way too early. I mean, realize that this was only the rookies and basically a couple veterans that were injured in for the first 3 days. So, Carson Wentz and Sam Bradford and Chase Daniel, those two guys sat today, but previously they're throwing to guys like Xavier Rush and Hunter Sharp, and nothing against them, but obviously they're not going to be here September 11th in week 1. So I don't know how much you can gauge by what went on the last 3 days. All you can say about Carson Wentz is, and I've said it from early in the off season, is that he looks the part. He's a very big guy, and he's still got plenty of body sort of to grow into as far as he can even add weight. The arm strength is there. The concern, and Doug kind of intimates it at times, is the mechanics. And that's, people shouldn't get that upset about that because that's basically every single rookie quarterback that's ever existed in this league. They sort of have to learn to get their foot down and be more consistent. And I think that's the biggest hurdle he's got to overcome before he gets into that conversation. But Mike, we've often talked about the plan, and the plan is unquestionably to put him in bubble wrap. But I think people get too excited about that because I say it all the time. We all have plans. You have a plan. Billy has a plan. I have a plan. Everybody has plans in life, and then you get thrown a curveball. So just because that's the Eagles' plan on July 27th, it doesn't mean it's going to be their plan week 4, week 8, week 12. If I put my money on it, I still bet we see Carson Wentz at some point this season.
Well, I mean, you can go back to Jacksonville just 2 years ago when they drafted Bortles. He was not going to play. Remember who was the quarterback of that team?
That was their plan. Chad Henne.
Chad Henne was the quarterback. 2 games in, all of a sudden that plan took a detour. I agree that things can certainly change if Sam Bradford doesn't play well. Sam Bradford got hurt. There's so many variables. This is a very fluid situation, but the plan is to not allow him to play or not have to have him play, and that's because, John, they hope that Bradford makes him not play, right? I mean, that's what their hope is. They want Bradford to make their decision difficult.
Yeah, they do, and they want to. We talked about it before. They're trying to serve 2 masters. They want to be relevant in the short term. They see what everybody else sees, that this is not a very good division on paper. There's not going to be a dominant team, and they think they can compete at the same time they're doing the rebuild. I'm not sure I like that plan personally. I don't know if it can work like that. You should really be gearing everything to make sure Carson Wentz is a success at this particular position. But that's the path the Eagles have chosen. They want to be relevant, and I think that comes from the owner, by the way. I think it's not about the head coach. It's not about the general manager. I think Jeffrey Lurie doesn't want this team to be irrelevant at any point, and that's sort of him putting the hammer down and saying, we need to keep this team competitive while we get Carson Wentz up to speed.
So you think that the front office and management believes this is a playoff team, or because of the division that they could be a playoff team?
Well, I think they believe they can compete in a bad division. And I'm not necessarily I don't necessarily think they're wrong on that because
we said this last week, John, when I was here. We discussed, was it you and I, that you stick any of the 4 teams in a hat, pull them out, and if you told me that was the way they were going to finish, I couldn't argue with you.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what the Eagles see. If there was if this were the NFC West and you had Seattle and Arizona in front of you, if it was the NFC North and you had Minnesota and Green Bay in front of you, if it was the NFC South and you had Carolina in front of you, I'm not sure they would think the same way. But in this particular division, they think 9 wins will put you in the conversation to possibly win this division again. And they look at this team and say, hey, we got a heck of a front 4 if those guys stay healthy. The offensive line, I think, is going to have a big bounce-back year out of Chip Kelly's tempo. That could be a strength of this team. The safeties are really good. And they say, hey, maybe if a couple breaks go our way, we can win 9 games. And if they win 9 games, they're going to be playing meaningful football at the bare minimum late in the season.
Hey, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Billy and I talked at the top of the show. I wrote a piece for the website about 5 guys that were on the roster last year that have to prove it. Now, I think it's subjective, obviously, and I think there's more than 5 that have prove-it type situations. This team did make the playoffs. Guy for me, one of my guys was Zach Ertz. The other guy, because of the contract he got, you give him that kind of money, I think it means, hey, we're expecting, prove to me that you can handle more of the load. But another guy I put on my list was Ryan Mathews. Now, he just got put on the inactive list with an ankle injury. Are they counting on this guy? I mean, do you look at them? I know camp really hasn't got underway full time, but Wendell Smallwood, I think, is a pretty key guy on this team all of a sudden.
Yeah, he is. He really is, and they were counting on him, but that's a bad decision when you're talking about Ryan Mathews. We talked about his injury history. All of a sudden, he hurts his ankle last week. And he's on the non-football injury list to start camp. Now, it's not time to panic because you got 6 weeks before you have to play a game that actually matters, and there's plenty of time for him to get ramped up for that. So I wouldn't go jumping off buildings right now, but as far as he's supposed to be the starting running back on this team. and his history is his history. And all of a sudden, you show up for day one, and he's not able to go. You go back to off-season work. You mentioned Wendell Smallwood, a rookie fifth-round pick, and Kenyon Barner. They got a lot of the majority of the first-team reps because Darren Sproles was out in San Diego. He only showed up for minicamp. And there were a lot of days where Ryan Mathews just couldn't go because of various ailments and illnesses, and that has followed him throughout his career. So if they are counting on Ryan Mathews to be a bell cow back for 16 games, I think that's not a good way to go about it. But the concern is, hey, I like Smallwood. I think he's shown some things in the off-season work and early in camp. I think he's a natural sort of one-cut runner, but he's a fifth-round pick for a reason. And one of the reasons is he's not a very good pass blocker, for instance. He's still learning to catch the ball out of the backfield. So all of that enters into it, and you're putting a lot on a plate of a fifth-round draft choice to expect him to carry this running game. But at some point, the Eagles might have to put that on him.
John, how about looking at a guy like Kenyon? I'm just looking at the depth chart. Kenyon Barner. I mean, he had a pretty good year last year. I mean, he had 28 carries for 124 yards. He did some things on the return team too that impressed. What do you make of his ability this year? Would they be leaning more on him?
Well, I think he's gonna be in a battle for a roster spot with a rookie named Byron Marshall, who just showed up this week. He was one of those guys on the quarter system, so he wasn't allowed to participate in the off-season work. And he was a heck of a player. He's also from Oregon, and he was a heck of a player in college. One year he played wide receiver, and he caught for over 1,000 yards. And the next year they made him a running back, and he ran for over 1,000 yards. So the Eagles have him at running back. He's coming back from a torn ACL. That's why he wasn't drafted. He's very natural catching the football. Obviously, the fact that he was a former receiver. And I can kind of compare him to Theo Riddick in Detroit, who did that at Notre Dame. He was a wide receiver, and then he moved to running back, and all of a sudden he gets to the NFL, and he's catching 80 balls out of the backfield. I think the Eagles like this kid, and he's really, really going to push Kenyon Barner for that final running back spot.
All right, we're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. He was at the NovaCare Center today. We talk about Bradham at the top there. You know, we've been talking a little bit about his thing, and then they go and cut Travis Long today. But Doug Peterson seems to think that he's comfortable with the linebacker spot there, John. He's got to say that, right? But overall, they got to be concerned about that spot.
Yeah, they have to be. And that's the first question I asked Jim Schwartz the day before. Because way back before the draft, Doug actually told us that Jim was lobbying for more bodies at the linebacker position. And all they got him was a seventh-round pick and Joe Walker and a couple undrafted free agents and Quentin Gauze and Mike Tavares. And that's scary. If you're talking about the starters, and one guy's such a knucklehead, he's punching a 50-year-old Cabana boy in the face. He's one of your starters. And your backups are Najee Good and Joe Walker and Mike Tavares. Well, Jim Schwartz isn't comfortable. Let's say that.
So you mentioned that's kind of scary to hear that. Joe Walker, not so good. Najee Good, sorry. Tulloch is a guy you wrote about a little while ago, and I know that you were kind of saying, well, he doesn't play special teams, so I don't know if he's a fit, but do they rethink that?
Well, I think they should, and that's what I advocate. I think they should sign Stephen Tulloch yesterday, and they should make him the starting middle linebacker for a couple reasons. One.
So where are you putting Hicks? Where are you putting Hicks?
Well, you're putting Hicks on the weak side because that's his natural position anyway, and that's where he's eventually going to end up. And then you have the domino puts Michael Kendricks on the strong side, and you don't have to worry about Nigel Bradham any longer.
So Bradham's the guy you're admitting a mistake on?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Bob Rhodes of the Delaware County Times. We both agreed Eagles should send a message today and cut him. They should release him. They signed him to a 2-year deal, I think $7 million. This would have been a good way, especially after the Nelson Aguilar nonsense earlier in the offseason, for Doug Peterson to put his foot down and say, I'm not gonna stand for this. If you act like this, you're not going to be on this football team. Now, I didn't expect that to happen. It's not going to happen for the reasons we just talked about. The Eagles have no depth at that position, and they need Nigel Bradham. But I think it would have been a very powerful statement if Doug sort of stood up and said, we're not going to stand for this, that he decided to go in a different direction. And I don't think Tulloch will be here for that reason. As I said, if you bring him in, you have to bring him in as a starter. And he would be their best middle linebacker the moment he stepped foot in South Philadelphia. I mean, he's a natural, instinctive guy. He's very big, very good run stuffer. And as I said, Hicks is a very good player, but he's a little bit undersized, especially for the middle. And to me, his long-term future in this league is going to be as a weak side linebacker. So you might as well get him there as early as possible.
You think Tulloch's a better player than Bradham?
I think he's a better two-down player than Bradham. I think, especially for what he does at this stage, and the fact that, as I said, he would be the guy in the middle. He understands defenses in this league. He certainly understands Jim's defense. He's been with him dating back to Nashville and also Detroit. So he knows the defense. He knows what to do. He's a natural run stuffer. At this stage of his career, he's only a two-down player. As I said, you have to bring him out in the nickel, but that's perfect because you have Hicks and Kendricks to play in the nickel. So that's not an issue. And Bradham's coming off the field anyway in that same situation. So you're basically arguing two-down player versus two-down player. One's a middle linebacker who would help you in so many ways as far as getting the defense set up and aligned correctly, and the other's a strong side linebacker who's just, a guy on the defense. So I think Tulloch is a much better fit for this team right now than Nigel Bradham.
All right, John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Eagles. There's a lot to get into here. They open up tomorrow, but so many storylines. I want to get your opinion. Forget Boldin. Boldin, right? That's who they were going after. Boldin. Man, I've been on vacation too long. Anquan Boldin. To me, he doesn't make a lot of sense, but does that show that they're sniffing around for that position? I don't know why Boldin would be a guy. He seems like a guy they already have. I mean, just maybe not as polished or good. They need a speed guy, my opinion anyway. I don't know about you, but what does it say about them sniffing around a guy like Boldin about their position at wide receiver then?
Yeah, it says they don't trust the guys they have because you're right. He's not a fit at all. He's basically, this guy's a potential Hall of Famer, so I don't want to say, but at this stage, he's going to be 36 in October. He's basically a 36-year-old version of Jordan Mathews, an inside receiver who's a possession guy who's going to move the chains, and that's not what they need. But it tells you what they think of the rest of their receiving corps, that they're willing to bring in a professional who understands how to play the game, understands how to run routes, even though he's not a great fit for what they need, is simply because he's better than what they have, even at 36 years old. And that's a big concern. It tells you what they think of Nelson Aguilar. It tells you what they think of Chris Gibbons and T.J. Graham, and even a little bit of Reuben Randall. It's not exactly, Randy Moss, Chris Carter, Jake Reed type receiving corps. It's not a very good group, and we've talked about that for months.
Hey, John, would it be to bring Anquan Boldin in to give veteran leadership? Like you said, he's a possible pro or a Hall of Fame candidate. I mean, bringing him in and having him, show the younger guys exactly what it takes to be a wide receiver, a mentor, a wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. He would certainly help in that stage. And a guy like that who runs great routes would be a tremendous advantage for the younger receivers they have as far as learning. It's one thing, for Greg Lewis, who's the wide receivers coach, to tell him what to do. But to have a guy who's still playing at a high level, he's got over 1,000 receptions. I think he's made 3 Pro Bowls. I mean, he's done it time and time again. He almost caught 70 balls with the 49ers last year, and you know how awful their quarterback situation was. So he understands how to play the position. And I think that more than fit was what the Eagles were thinking about, because they have so much youth. I mean, Reuben Randall is the graybeard of this whole unit, and he's not exactly been around for a ton of time, and he's not known as a guy who pays a lot of attention to detail and who runs great routes. He's got a lot of talent, but the whole knock on him with the Giants was he would run the wrong route and Eli would throw a pick. So that's not the guy you want sort of leading the wide receiver room. And I think that's the reason they wanted Boldin in more than his physical capabilities.
We're looking at the Eagles, and they open tomorrow, and we'll have John on. John got about 2 weeks off?
That's the NFL. Hey, I could be working for a living. I never complain. I get to cover football for a living.
And John will, we'll be back with John daily now throughout the rest of the NFL season with his updates and reports. And you can always get him at JF McMullen on Twitter at 973ESPN.com. He already has a ton of Eagles training camp stuff at the website. Today he's got all the day 3 Eagles camp notes from NovaCare that you need to know. It is a ton of Eagles coverage over at the website from John, and every day at 4:05 this season, starting, I guess, today. Although I think you were on earlier in the week when I wasn't here, so we kind of got that up.
I was on with Josh Monday, Tuesday, so we've been going full bore.
All right, we're back with John full-time now with the Eagles back. But I do want to get a couple quick NFL thoughts. John also covers the league on a national level. He has for a long time at todayspigskin.com. And number one, I guess the big news here, somewhat big, I guess it's not so big NFL-wise, but Nick Foles released by the Rams. You know, this is an interesting one. This move has been kind of building. The Eagles trade him, for Bradford. He goes out there. He kind of falls on his face. He signs that extension. Then they draft a quarterback. So then he basically pulls at Bradford and says, no, he wants to be traded. Then he decides that's not too smart. He goes to camp, and now he asks to be released, and the Rams grant him his release here. Is the Nick Foles, is somebody, is there going to be interest in him out there?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, there's so many quarterback-desperate teams. I think the natural spot everyone is focused on is the New York Jets, because they're still playing hardball with Ryan Fitzpatrick. And if you saw Ryan over the weekend playing golf in the American Century Championship, he wasn't in the best shape. So I don't even know if they signed him today, he'd be ready to play. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Jets handle that situation. I don't believe they think Geno Smith is the guy, so I could see them making a play and sort of rolling the dice on Nick Foles, because, one, he'd be much more cost-effective than Fitzpatrick, who still wants $12 million, $13 million a year. Nick's not going to ask for that. And the second part, the one thing we can all agree on, whether you're a Nick Foles fan or not, is generally he's going to do everything you ask as far as being a leader of the team and being the quarterback. Obviously, he got frustrated in St. Louis after losing the job, and now that Jared Goff is in Los Angeles, he's got no shot there. So it was natural to ask for his release. And for a quarterback-desperate league, sure, he's going to get a chance somewhere.
All right, so there's the news from L.A. that Foles has been asked for and granted his release. And then you just heard the news from John Fitzpatrick, not in the best shape this weekend, as he was hanging out with Brandon Marshall, right?
Yeah, he was in Chicago. And, Brandon, that's another thing with the Jets, is the fact that Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, who are two great receivers, have basically lobbied for his return the entire time, and yet the Jets are still playing hardball, and they still haven't said, hey, it'll make some sense if you say, Ryan's not our guy, we need to go forward with a younger player, Geno as the bridge to Christian Hackenberg. But that's not their plan, obviously, because they haven't stated it. So, to be honest, I have no idea what the Jets are doing. I think they've done a very poor job with this whole circumstance. And hey, maybe it's time to hit Control-Alt-Delete and just go, let's bring in Nick Foles.
He's John McMullen. More at 97.3ESPN.com. We'll talk to you tomorrow, John.
Hey, thanks.